Om Aganati Manandasya Ganangana Sadakya Chaksurun Miritam Yena Tasmai Sugirave Namaha Sri Chaitanya Manovistam Stapitam Yena Bhutade Sayam Rupakaramayam Darati Swaparantikam Bandeham Sugiru Siyata Parakamaram Shigurun Vaishnavam Sa Siyurupam Sagadatam Sahagana Raganatam Vitam Stam Sadevam Sadvaitam Sabadutam Parijana Saitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Sri Radha Krishna Padan Sahagana Lalita Shrivishikan Vitam Stam Nama Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Pastaya Bhutade Srimati Bhaktivedanta Swami Tanamani Namaste Saraswati Devi Gauravani Pachadini Nirvishes Sanyavadi Paskata Desara Sri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Sri Advaita Gadadhar Shiva Siddhi Gaur Bhaktavindam Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Ram 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 Hare Hare Narayanam Namaskritam Naram Jevadanotamam Devam Saraswatim Vyasam Tato Jayodhyat Nishta Prayasho Bhadresho Nityam Bhagavata Savara Bhagavati Atamashoki Bhaktir Bhavati Naistiki Nigamaka Parugariram Param Shukamakaram Shamitam Pibata Bhagatam Rashamare Amahora Hori Sikobubi Bhagaham Krishna Sadam Apagate Damigam Corona Stadi Shamasho Padana Koduno Didam Tom Piadabashuta Bishatam Pipo Samapian Virambido Prakyahida Homaradam Sanklation Evanima Santi Nanyadam. Welcome to Wisdom Wednesday, emanating from Spanish Fork, Utah. We're 2 days after Balaram Purnima and 6 days prior to Janmashtami. Govinda Bhakta, the Pujari and priest up at the Salt Lake City Temple, has arranged a series of evening kathas to take us right up to the Janmashtami day. Last night we had a talk, Why the Unborn is Born by Chaitanya Swarup Das, all the way from India. The talks come onto the Facebook Live page, Krishna Temple in Salt Lake City at 7:30 Mountain Daylight Time. Anybody's welcome to access them. These are talks by our various congregational members. As I said last night, we had an excellent talk by Chaitanya Swarup entitled Why the Unborn is Born. Tomorrow night is Krishna, Incarnation of Vishnu by our learned scholaress, Amrita Sundari Mataji. On the 6th, Krishna is the Source of Incarnations by Shambhihari Prabhu, who will be talking to us from India as well. The 7th, Krishna Tattva is explained by Govinda Bhakta, according to Ramananda Roy. On the 8th, Childhood Pastimes of Krishna by Charu Das. On the 9th of August, Vrindavan Pastimes Part 1 by Sundari Priya. On the 10th, Vrindavan Pastimes Part 2 by Draupadi Rani Mataji from India. And then on the 11th, the day of Janmashtami, the Advent of Krishna by Charu Prabhu. Those will be on Facebook Live every day this week and next week leading up to Tuesday, August 11th, which is Janmashtami Day. So go ahead and tune in, 7:30 every evening, Mountain Daylight Time. Good morning, Govinda. Good morning, Joe. Good morning, Jimmy. Thank you for all your little emojis up there. Certainly inspiring. And we're so inspired, in fact, by the nectar that we churned out of yesterday's verse, that we're going to return to that same verse today for Srimad Bhagavatam, 1st Canto, 2nd Chapter, verse 31, Part 2. Good morning, Prashant and Sachi Mata. Here we go again for round 2 on this wonderful verse. Taya vilashateshu eshu guneshu ganavam eva antapravishta abati viganena vishumbitaha. After creating the material substance, the Lord, Vasudeva, expands himself and enters into it. And although he is within the material modes of nature and appears to be one of the created beings, he is always fully enlightened in his transcendental position. We're just going to read a part of the purport here. The living entities are separated parts and parcels of the Lord, and the conditioned living entities who are unfit, and we talked about that quite extensively yesterday, for the spiritual kingdom, are strewn. And we talked also about how there are 8,400,000 species of life strewn throughout the unlimited universes, and the reason that they're unfit for the spiritual world, the reason that they reside in this world of birth, death, disease, and old age, and are strewn throughout the planetary systems and throughout the various species of life, is that they have come here to enjoy matter to the fullest extent that is possible. As Paramatma, an eternal friend of the living being, the Lord, by one of his plenary portions, Sirodakshay Vishnu, accompanies the living entities to guide them in their material enjoyment and to become witness to all their activities. We talked yesterday from 13th chapter, 22nd verse of the Bhagavad Gita. Purusha prakriti stohi bhankte prakritin jangunam karanam guna sangasyat sarasot yana janmashu. Instead of allowing ourselves to be enjoyed by our Creator, the owner and proprietor of all the planetary systems, we want to enjoy His property. This is the illicit thieving mentality which gets us into trouble in the first place. Someone says, well, why should I want to be enjoyed? Our experience in this material world is if you surrender to any ordinary person or politician or wealthy man, entrepreneur, a famous person, that person will take advantage of you. Even in the religious field, there are many instances of the preachers picking the pockets of their congregation. So in the material world, you have to be very careful. Pretty much it's a given that whenever you surrender to another conditioned soul, who's here for the same reasons that we're here, to enjoy his senses, and he will take advantage of your submission and surrender to exploit you so that he can all the better enjoy his senses. And so you're very right to be wary and cautious when we talk about being enjoyed, being exploited, surrender, because that's our experience in this material world. It's like in the prison house. You're not going to find anybody in the prison house who has an honest enough, upright enough character that you really want to put your life in their hands. You know that because they wouldn't be in the prison house in the first place if they were that type of an honest, upright person. So similarly, all souls have come to this material world due to criminality in their consciousness. They want to illicitly and criminally enjoy God's property as their own. And so we hesitate quite rightly, quite properly. We balk at any suggestion of surrendering to another conditioned soul in this material world. But surrendering to being enjoyed and being exploited by the Supreme Personality of Godhead is another animal altogether. God created us. He's our eternal loving Father. He wants the best for us. And so there's no better position for us than to allow ourselves to be used, not misused. Misused is the applicable word in this material world between one conditioned soul and another. But the Lord will never misuse you. Rather, he will take you, he'll mold you, he'll elevate you, and ultimately gather you back home, back to Godhead, where life is eternal, full of bliss and knowledge. So one never loses through the process of surrender to one's eternal, loving, all-powerful Father. One will always pretty much lose when one surrenders to another impoverished, criminally minded soul in this material world. So one must first of all be able to distinguish between the one and the other. And when one comes to the real thing, that the lotus feet of the Lord, to whom all the great saints and sages in the past have surrendered, and one follows in their footsteps, then one reaches the perfection of life. Otherwise, it is said, Purusha Prakriti, we're Prakriti. Our nature is that we're enjoying. Just like Father, he loves his son. So the Father wants to enjoy his son. But that doesn't mean that he sells his son into slavery. It means that he educates his son, he teaches his son, he spends time with his son, he cultivates friendship with his son, he makes sure that his son gets all the right connections, all the right teaching, all the right input, all the right association, so that his son becomes the best version of his son that he could possibly be. The Father's wanting to exploit or use the son or enjoy the son is the very, very best possible outcome for the son, because the Father wants for the son what is best for him. And when the son is shining, effulgent, full of joy, when he's a good husband, when he's a good citizen, when he's a good devotee, then the Father enjoys that like anything. And so it is our nature to be enjoyed and, if you will, exploited. Prabhupada and the previous acharyas call it, what we aspire for is divine slavery. divine slavery. We want to be the divine slaves of God, because we'll not be the losers, but we'll be the gainers millions of times over. Oftentimes people ask us, what are these beads around your neck? They're created from Tulsi, which is very, very dear to Lord Krishna. You're not supposed to offer any foodstuffs to Krishna without the Tulsi leaf accompanying the foodstuffs. We also have chanting beads made from the wood of Tulsi, neck beads. Tulsi is not supposed to be killed for her wood, but after she dies a natural death, and the wood is employed for neck beads. But when people ask us what the purpose of the neck beads are, the neck collar says we're dogs of God. We're dogs of God. In this material world, the souls, they want to be God. They want to be Purusha. They want to be the enjoyer. But we're not the enjoyer, we're the enjoyed. So they want to be God, but the servants of the Lord, the devotees, we just want to be the servants of God. We want to be God's dogs, you might say. We want to be absorbed and immersed in the service of the Lord, the plans of the Lord, the mission of the Lord here on this earth planet. And that's the liberated state, when you've got the creator of millions and millions of universes breathing in your direction, when you put yourself right in the middle of his benevolent plan for bringing all conditioned living souls back to home, back to Godhead. That means that even in this body, even in this lifetime, you are a 100% liberated soul. Otherwise, if you're envious of the Lord and you're loath to follow the path of the Lord, that is karanam guna sangasya. That is the cause of your entanglement in the three modes of material nature, and you're experiencing good and evil amongst the various species of life. Prabhupada says here, every living entity is eternally the part and parcel of the Supreme Lord, and both of them are very intimately related as friends. But the living entity has a tendency to reject the sanction of the Lord and act independently in an attempt to dominate nature, and because of this tendency is called the marginal energy of the Lord. We're not byproducts of matter. Our body is a byproduct of matter. Our mind is a byproduct of matter. But we ourselves, the living entity who resides within the body and the mind, is a byproduct of spirit. We're emanations from the internal potency of the Lord. And originally, we're meant to engage in intimate, eternal, relishable, loving pastimes with the Supreme Personality of Godhead. But because we're only small particles of the Lord, our energy and our cognizance is limited. And so therefore, there's the possibility of our being captured, enamored by the external material energy of the Lord. As we said yesterday, 3/4 of the souls, as they manifest from the body of the Lord, figure that I'm right where I should be, I'm in the spiritual world. They engage themselves in the service of the Lord, and their spiritual senses mature, develop, unfold, blossom right from the beginning of their manifestation. However, there are about 1/4 of manifested living beings who want to see what it would be like to live independently of the Lord, to try to set themselves up as little potentates, have their own sovereignty, their own area of influence. As the poem said, they want to be monarch of all that they survey. And so the Lord very kindly provides for them this alternate material universe into which they're plunged and, as I said, meet with good and evil amongst the various species of life. And because we're spirit, but we've left the spiritual atmosphere, we've left the intimate association of the Lord, which is guided and dominated by his internal potency. And as spiritual beings, we've entered into the material atmosphere. We've mixed ourselves with the dull, inert, dark, dead material, external energy of the Lord. Therefore, we're called marginal. In other words, we're spirit, but we're overwhelmed by the material atmosphere. And although we're eternally liberated souls by nature, free from misery, free from suffering, free from birth, death, disease, and old age, we're in kind of a dreamlike state, whereas insofar as we identify with matter and we try to enjoy our senses in this material world, we seem to experience suffering here in the conditioned state. Here's a little more explanation in Srimad Bhagavatam, 3rd canto, 7th chapter, 10th verse. Yad artena vinamusa pumsam atma viparyaya pratyati upadrashtu shashiras chidadandika. The living entity is in distress regarding his self-identity. He has no factual background, like a man who dreams that he sees his head cut off. Now, it's impossible for you to see your head. If your head's cut off, you follow me? You're not going to be able to see your head. You see what I'm saying? That's an illusion. That's a state of consciousness which is false. You may imagine that to be the case. For instance, I heard about a teacher in school once threatened a pupil who was chronically misbehaving, that if the pupil didn't behave himself, the student would cut off the pupil's head and hang it on the wall so that the child could see how his head became cut off. And as a result of this graphic, imaginary description of the teacher, the child became frightened, intimidated, and stopped his mischief. So Prabhupada says, similarly, the miseries of the pure soul and the disruption of his self-identification are managed by the external energy of the Lord, which controls the mischievous living entities who want to go against the will of the Lord. Actually, there's no bondage or misery for the living entity. So in the same way that you cannot have your head cut off and see your head, that's imaginary. Similarly, the birth, death, disease, and old age, sufferings, loss, disappointment, defeat, these are imaginary sufferings because we are eternal spirit soul. Brahma Bhuta Prashanatma Nasojati Nakanjati. We are aloof from and apart from matter. It's due to the combination of permutations of matter that miseries arrive. Let's say you have a friend who's extremely despondent, sitting down somewhere with tears flowing down his or her cheeks. You want to some or other lighten their burden, some or other console your friend. So you sit down beside them. You might put your arm around their shoulders. And what do you say? Go ahead and type it in the comments. You say, what's the, go ahead and type it, the answer. See how many of you, I'll give you 10 seconds. When you want to console your friend who's down and depressed, what do you say to them? You sit down and you say, what's the 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, what's the matter? Well, you not only asked the question, but you answered the question too. The matter is matter. If we weren't in the context of matter, we wouldn't be suffering. We wouldn't be experiencing loss and disappointment, disease and old age. We have had a loss recently here to our Utah devotional community, a very sharp loss. And it sobered us all. Every year we do the Festival of India. I don't think we're going to be able to do it this September. But for almost 40 years, we've done the Festival of India every fall. And really, it's a celebration of Ram is what it is. In the fall, you celebrate Ram's return from exile from the forest. You celebrate Ram's victory over Ravana. And we do a 1-hour representation of the drama of the Ramayana. And for the last 15 years or so, a young lady, originally from Europe, who emigrated here with her parents, they had been devotees in Europe, and the first place they stayed when they came to America was here on the property. This is way back in the 80s. They stayed in the radio station, and they lived there for several years. The Shabonis family, then eventually they moved to Park City, and they moved to Heber, and their eldest daughter, Ganga, became a lawyer. But she always came back. She and her mother always played roles. We wouldn't necessarily see them that much during the year, but they would always come back for the Ramayana, and extremely faithfully, diligently, the oldest daughter, Ganga, would play the role of Kaikeyi, the betrayer of Ram, Ram's stepmother, and her mother, who's a comedian and an amazing lady, Vishnu Priya would pray Supranyak. Well, Ganga perished a couple of Saturdays ago in a plane crash. It took off from South Jordan Airport with some friends. They were going to go to the Grand Canyon, but they only got a few miles, crashed in South Jordan, and she lost her life. So the parents were here. They came, visited after having been to the crematorium. We're going to have a memorial Shraddha ceremony on Thursday evening at 5 o'clock. Anybody who knows Ganga is welcome to come and attend the fire sacrifice and the memorial service right here in Spanish Fort. But the parents are devastated. It's not natural that a parent should survive their children. If you go back to the time when Krishna was on the planet, you had the pious rulers and kings. No parent ever had to lose a child. The natural order of things is that the parents always precede the children in going to the abode of Yamaraj. It is the most disruptive, unnatural thing for a parent to have to bury their own child. And naturally, Mayapur, the father, Vishnu Priya, just devastated. And I recalled this phrase here because of my preparations for this Wisdom Wednesday class, that misery and sufferings for the eternal living soul are, in the last issue, imaginary. The soul does not suffer plane crashes, burning, smoke inhalation. These are external to the soul itself. They're more or less imaginary. And someone says, well, true. How can you say that? There obviously is suffering. We obviously do feel the loss. We do feel the pain at the time of death. Not denying that. But when you come to your awakened state, when you are gathered into the arms of your Divine Father, Lord Krishna, Supreme Personality of Godhead, then all those sufferings throughout countless incarnations in the material world, all those revolutions of birth, death, disease, and old age. And at the time, they were very real. They were very painful. They were extremely uncomfortable. But from the awakened, enlightened point of view, they recede into insignificance just as much as having awakened from a recent dream. During the dream, it's so real. You may be thrashing in your bed, sweating. You may imagine that a tiger is coming to eat you. You get all wrapped up in your sheets and your bedclothes, and you're extremely uncomfortable. But if someone comes and shakes you and says, Churu, 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 you're having a bad dream, wake up. And you open your eyes and come to consciousness, awakening consciousness, all those fears go away. It's not to say they weren't real at the time, but ultimately, bottom line, they are something imaginary. Just like you imagine the head being cut off and you watch your head being mounted on a wall by that teacher. It is frightening to the student. It may be effective in getting the student to stop misbehavior and behave himself, but ultimately it's just an empty threat. That state is only an imaginary state. And similarly, when we really think about it, there is no suffering for the soul. There's only the appearance of suffering because of our attachment, because we've identified so thoroughly with matter and the circumstances of matter and the waxing and waning of matter, that we have opened ourselves up unnecessarily for suffering. Otherwise, in the enlightened state, it says, Dhirasthita namoyate. Those who are awake, who spiritually enlivened and enlightened in Krishna consciousness, they realize that for the soul, there's no birth, death, disease, and old age. There's no suffering. It's all a sort of a dreamlike state from which we aspire to awaken as quickly as we can. And just in the same way that your friend comes to you while you're suffering within the dream and says your name or says something, Churu, wake up, wake up, wake up, you're just having a bad dream. Similarly, the Guru comes to you from the world of light, the eternal world, the real world. He comes down and a mission of mercy into this darkness, and by sound vibration, he tries to waken you up from your slumbering state, with the sound of the holy names. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. And the Guru is also within your heart. He's never left you. Though you left God from your origins in the spiritual world and went to the material world to try to enjoy apart from him, he accompanied you out of his causeless mercy. He's always been with you. Even though you've turned your back on him, he's not turned his back on you. Upadasthana Martacha, Bhota Bhakta Maheshwaram, Paramatmi Chapiyoko, Deshmin Parashama. The Super Soul, your loving Father, in his expansion as Jirodakshay Vishnu, accompanies each and every living being in the region of the heart. This is alluded to here in the Chaitanya Charitamrita, Adi Leela, 2nd chapter, 19th verse. Ananta Shratike Yaiche Eka Surya Bhase Taiche Jiva Govindara Amsha Prakashe. As one sun appears reflected in countless jewels, so Govinda manifests himself as Paramatma or Super Soul in the hearts of all living beings. Someone may ask the question, well, make up your mind, true. Is God in the hearts of every living being, or is he one individual entity far removed from us in the spiritual world? The answer is that he's both. You may not be able to conceive of someone being at all places at all times simultaneously and at the same time being separate from his created world. But if you could conceive of it, then you'd be God and he would be somehow or other less than God. So part of our devotion, part of our awakening is to recognize that the Lord is by definition inconceivable. He's simultaneously, inconceivably one with the creation and different from it. So it said, Advaitam Achyutam Anadim Ananta Rupam. The Lord is one. At the same time, he is Ananta Rupam. He expands himself into millions and millions of forms. It's just like the examples given here. You have one sun in the sky, but wherever you go during daylight hours on the surface of the earth, and you pull from your pocket, perhaps it's resting, nestling in your dark pocket in a dark place where there's no light. But when you pull a jewel out of your pocket and expose it to the light, it immediately catches that light in its prism and it starts to sparkle. And as you turn it various directions, it radiates in different ways. Now, however many jewels different people on different locations on the surface of the earth pull out of their pockets during daylight hours, those jewels will all catch the light from the one sun. Similarly, God is one indivisible living being, but he's also reflected in the hearts of each and every living being. As a Super Soul, he's the overseer, the witness, and the permitter. He doesn't interfere with our misuse of our intelligence. We make so many non-God-centered decisions independent of the Lord, independent of the advice of the Lord, for which we incur karma and get further and further entangled in this material world. Prabhupada says, the Christians ask the question, how can one be responsible or be liable for actions of which one has no recollection? It is explained that our karma, our past actions, rests in three different general phases. There is the seed of independence. There's the seed of whimsy and capriciousness within the heart called the pap bij. And that seed leads us to make wrong decisions, non-God-centered decisions, independent of the Lord, and cause ourselves bitter reactions. There are seeds of sinful actions which have not yet been acted upon, resting in a dormant form within their heart. So that's one aspect or one phase of our karma called pap bij. There's another phase of our karma where in the past, either previous in this life or in a past life, we've acted upon those sinful desire seeds, made a poor choice, but the reaction has not yet arrived. It is we're going to intersect it in the future. Just like a seed, it has not yet matured and produced its bitter fruit. Now, there are other sinful desires that we have also acted upon, which do not have as long a period of maturation, or it may be that we've acted on them more distantly in the past, and it's taken a while for them to mature, but we're undergoing the results of those actions right now. So 3 phases: sinful desires on which we have not yet acted, sinful desires on which we've acted and we're experiencing the fruits right now, sinful desires on which we've acted, but the fruits, the results are not yet to come. It is said that in devotional service, in Krishna consciousness, the results, the reactions of all 3 karmic actions in all 3 of those phases are eradicated when one comes to devotional service and chants the holy names of the Lord. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. But one might say, a skeptic might say, you cannot be responsible for reactions to deeds of which you have no memory. As the body changes, we're subject to forgetfulness. We'd be hard-pressed to explain what we did this time a week ago or a month ago or a year ago, what to speak of in past lives. So because of the change of the body, we have no recollection of sinful desires that we performed in a previous life, nor do we have much recollection of sinful activities that we committed in this life. And so therefore, the assertion of the skeptic is, how can you be prosecuted for sinful actions of which you have no recollection? Now, in the court, the criminal may claim amnesia. He may claim that he doesn't remember the crime that he committed, but he can still be convicted if there are witnesses who can attest to his having done that act. Similarly, we are called to task for our non-God-centered choices by the presence of the Supersoul within the heart. He is the overseer, he is the proprietor, and he is also the permitter. That means he doesn't interfere with our minute dependence. However, the responsibility that we've assumed when we walked away from God is that he will no longer be responsible for our actions. If our actions are no longer for the benefit and to honor and to glorify God, but rather they're to promote our own false ego conceived of as separate from God, then we have to be responsible for the results of all our choices. And that responsibility comes into effect, comes into play because of the role of this Paramatma or the Supersoul. He never forgets. That can work in such a way as to make us accountable, but also that can work in such a way as to make us eligible for liberation. The prodigal son may forget the father, but the father never forgets the son and never stops trying to get the son to go back to home, back to God. Prabhupada writes here, the Paramatma or the Supersoul who accompanies the living being is the witness of the past activities of the individual being. A man may not remember what he has done in his childhood, but his father, who has seen him grow through different stages of development, certainly remembers. Similarly, the living being undergoes many changes of body through many lives, but the Supersoul is always with him and remembers all his activities despite his evolution through different bodies. At this point, I think I could possibly be persuaded to sing our karma song if I were to see some emojis floating up there. Kalakanta Prabhu wrote a book called The Rap of God, based on the Bhagavad Gita. And I took some of those verses and made my own version, call it Karma A to Z, everything you always wanted to know about karma, but didn't know how to act. Okay, I'm feeling inspired right now. Let me see if I can recall the lyrics up into my mind. Karma is action and reaction. You sow the seed, you face the deed. Whatever you do comes back to you. The law of cause and effect ensures that the balance is perfect, detecting whatever you do, good and bad, it will resurrect. Death is not the end, it's just a bend. Whatever you've done is going to circle back again. The body may die, but your karma is standing by. You'll be reborn to live and die, continue to suffer and cry. As aroma follows the flower, as heat pursues the fire, your karma will track you as soon as you leave the funeral pyre. Karma decides how you'll be reborn, comely or scorned, high or humiliated, straight or deformed, animal or human, healthy or ill, long or short-lived, sheltered or adrift. Karma is what makes the world go round. It's cause and effect right down there on the ground for those going over and around, up and down, bound by their deeds, drowned by their needs. Is there any purpose to our life on earth? Do we just die and continually take birth? Is there any escape from the pain of coming back again and again and again and again? You're not this flesh and you're not this mind. Eternal spirits designed after the image of the Almighty Divine, assigned to His service sublime, attracted by unselfish action, serving the Lord with dispassion, acting only for His satisfaction. Devoted souls achieve extraction from karmic reaction. If you want to burn up your karma, act according to the dharma of serving the Lord. Fashioned by His hand, act according to His plan, and never come back to this mortal world again. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. So that's karma from A to Z. It gives you a little insight into how it is that karma acts because of the wet presence and witnessing power of the Supersoul. He does not interfere with our minute independence, but the caveat is that we have to be responsible for our own deeds. If you throw the ball down on the floor, then however it bounces, you have to be able to deal with that. That's part of growing up, that's part of maturity, that's part of taking responsibility for our actions. And that enlightened, awakened stage whereby all suffering seems remote as a dream from which you've just emerged, you cannot achieve spiritual growth and spiritual maturity without first and foremost accepting responsibility for your actions. Blaming others, blaming your upbringing, blaming your disadvantages, blaming God. Blaming is described as be lame. Be lame. You have only yourself to blame for your pains and pleasures, and when you face that and acknowledge that and take responsibility for our own actions, then you're on your progressive path back to home, back to Godhead. In the Shvetashvatara Upanishad, it further describes the relationship between the Supreme Soul, who's one indivisible, but at the same time accompanies in the heart, and the individual wayward errant soul. It says, Samane Vriksha Purusho Nimagno Nishaya Sochiti Moyamanaha Justam Yada Pasanti Anyam Isham Ashama Himanam Iti Viti Shokaha. This is in the Shvetashvatara Upanishad, 4th chapter, 7th verse. Although the two birds are in the same tree, the tree is this body, the one bird is the individual soul who's enjoying the bitter and sweet fruits of the tree, whose back is turned to the other bird who is the Paramatma, the Super Soul, our loving Lord. It says the eating bird is fully engrossed with anxiety and moroseness as the enjoyer of the fruits of the tree. But if in some way or other he turns his face to his friend who is the Lord and learns His glories, at once the suffering bird becomes free of all anxieties. And the whole process of enlightenment of Arjuna in the Bhagavad Gita is involved in Arjuna's turning his face towards his eternal friend, Krishna. The turning point of the Bhagavad Gita comes early in the 2nd chapter, the point at which Arjuna gets relief from his sufferings, he gets insight, he gets enlightenment, is the point at which he turns to Krishna and says, Karpanya dosho patasha baha pichamitam dharma yaksreyasya nistyam buri sishyasteham sarivam pramprapanam. Krishna, I'm going to stop my independent speculations. I'm going to stop coming up with my own solutions to my self-created problems. I'm going to turn to you for advice and for enlightenment. Why? Because you are all-seeing, you are all-knowing,
You are all powerful, and you are my best friend. Though I have left you, you never left me. Thus it is said, after hearing from Krishna, one can understand what is what, and one will begin to be free from lamentation and free from the dreamlike sufferings that we experience as conditioned souls in this material world. Srimad Bhagavatam, bottom line, first canto, second chapter, the same chapter that we're in right now, but we discussed this verse a few weeks ago. Nevertheless, it is pivotal. It is key for our practice of Krishna consciousness. Here it is. Shrinvatam Shra Kata Krishna Punya Sravanam Kirtanam Haridanshashtu Abadani Bidunoti Saritsatam. Shukadeva Goswami says, follow me if you will. The Sri Krishna, the Supreme Personality of God, who is the Paramatma, the Super Soul in everyone's heart, and the benefactor of the truthful devotee, cleanses desire for material enjoyment from the heart of the devotee who has developed the urge to hear his messages, which are in themselves virtuous when properly heard and chanted. We got ourselves into this ocean, this samsara of birth, death, disease, and old age, of loss, despondency, disappointment, and suffering. We did that all by ourselves, against the wishes of the Lord, against the conclusion of scriptures, against the advice of saints and sages. Now, we did get ourselves into this mess all by ourselves, but part of extricating ourselves and rising up to pure consciousness involves the recognition that we cannot get out of this ocean on our own. We need to cry out for the help and the assistance of the Lord. It's very appropriate that just 2 days ago, we celebrated Balaram Purnima. Balaram took his birth on the earth 5,000 years ago, just 8 or 10 days before Lord Krishna appeared. So before we can approach Krishna, before we can aspire to pure Krishna consciousness, we must call out to Balaramaji, recognizing that I can't get out of this vast ocean of birth, death, disease, and old age on my own. I need the help. I need the boat of the Lord's lotus feet. Bala means strength. It means strength. So I cannot break myself of my bad patterns of thinking and behavior on my own so-called limited strength. However, Lord Balaram is standing by, and he's got the Shakti, he's got the power to extricate me, to extend down to me the inner tube, the life raft, by which then I can be extricated from this vast ocean of birth and death. It is said that in the fire of devotional service, with the help of Balaram in the form of the Guru and the spiritual master, it is said that devotional service then, the performance of devotional service, rising early in the morning, the pre-dawn hours, chanting on your beads, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, taking sanctified vegetarian food which is offered to the Lord, aspiring after visiting the holy places of the Lord's pastimes like Vrindavan and Mayapur, associating only with God-conscious devotees of the Lord, hearing only from devotees of the Lord. And as I mentioned, every night this week leading up to Janmashtami on the Hare Krishna Temple of Salt Lake City Facebook page, we will have a live talk by one or another of the congregates of the Salt Lake City Temple. Urge you to take advantage of this. We heard from Chaitanya Swarup last night how it is that the unborn becomes born. Give a masterful presentation every night this week. I ask you to take advantage. Put yourself in the fire of hearing the glories of Krishna from the devotees of Krishna who are coming in the bona fide chain of succession. This will be the result, as it's described from Lord Krishna to Uddhava. These are the words of the Lord about the power of devotional service. Yataya dagni sasamridarchita korote edhamshi bashmasat tata madvishaya bhaktir Uddhava Vaimshi Krishna Daham. Speaking to his friend Uddhava, Lord Krishna says, my dear Uddhava, devotional service in relationship with me is like a blazing fire that can burn to ashes all the fuel of sinful activities supplied to it. Just like a blazing fire turns all kinds of wood and roots and seeds to ashes, devotional service performed under the guidance of a bona fide spiritual master burns to ashes the sinful desire seeds which are lying dormant in your heart. It burns to ashes the results of activities of the results of which you're experiencing in the present, and it burns to ashes also the reactions of sinful activities that are coming to you in the future. It burns to ashes the results of your karma in all three different phases. And how is that possible? Because you're no longer alone. You have the help of the all-powerful Lord, who says in Bhagavad Gita, chapter 10, Tesham evanu kampartam aham ajanumdam nisyami atbhavasho gadadeepanavashada. To show those who are devoted to me, to show those who have adopted the process of devotional service, my special mercy, I, dwelling within their hearts, destroy with the shining lamp of knowledge the darkness born of ignorance. And Prabhupada says, only by devotional service is the Supreme Truth Krishna pleased, and by his inconceivable energy he can reveal himself to the heart of the pure devotee. The pure devotee always has Krishna within his heart, and with the presence of Krishna, who is just like the sun, the darkness of ignorance is at once dissipated. This is the special mercy rendered to the pure devotee by Krishna. And one last sentence here. The pure devotee does not have to worry about the material necessities. Like someone says, well, if I devote myself to devotional service and earmark some of my precious time for chanting and prasadam and associating devotees, what about my necessities of life? Prabhupada assures such a one. Pure devotee does not have to worry about the material senses of life necessity. He need not be anxious, because when he removes the darkness from the heart, everything is provided automatically by the Supreme Lord, who is pleased by the loving devotional service of the devotee. Om Tat Sat. I won't be with you again until the weekend, but you do have an opportunity to keep yourself in the fire of hearing and chanting about the Lord. As Paki has just reminded me, from the Facebook page of the Salt Lake, of the Hare Krishna Temple of Salt Lake City, every evening, Mountain Daylight Time, at 7:30, going on Facebook Live, will be one or another of our various congregational members from here. The schedule is that tomorrow night, tonight, Amrita Sundari will be speaking on the topic, is Krishna incarnation of Vishnu? The following night, the topic is Krishna is the source of incarnations by Shambhari Prabhu. On the 7th August, Krishna Tattva, as explained by Ramananda Roy, by Govinda Bhaktadas. On the 8th of August, the childhood pastimes of Krishna by yours truly. The 9th and 10th are Vrindavan pastimes, part 1 and part 2, by Sundari Priya Mataji and Draupadi Rani Mataji. And then on the actual Janmashtami, the Advent of Lord Krishna by yours truly, True Prabhu. So every night this week leading up to the holiest of holy days, the appearance of Sri Krishna Janmashtami next Tuesday, 11th, 7:30 Mountain Daylight Time. You've got an opportunity to hear Katha from the exalted members of the Salt Lake Krishna congregation, with whom I am so fortunate to be bound in loving devotional service and in aspiration for advancing. Until we meet again, please don't forget to chant Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare.